There's a quiet that seeps into your bones, folks. Not the peaceful kind, the one you find in an empty church or a snow-covered field. No, this is the deep, suffocating hush that comes just before something truly awful happens. It's the sound of the woods holding its breath, watching. And tonight, we're diving into a silence that Sarah and Mark would never forget. A silence that became the soundtrack to their worst nightmare. A silence born in the heart of the Blackwood Pines. Picture this: Sarah and Mark, a young couple, both burnt out on the city grind. Early 30s, chasing that elusive reset button. They stumbled upon an old listing online for a cabin deep in what looked like untouched wilderness. Rustic charm, the ad boasted. Off-grid escape. Reviews were scarce, a few cryptic lines about unbeatable quiet and a unique experience, nothing truly alarming, so they booked it. They were desperate for peace, for a break from the constant hum of concrete and screens. What they found was anything but peace. The drive alone was a warning they chose to ignore. The paved road dwindled to gravel, then to a barely there dirt track. Trees, ancient and gnarled, clawed at the sky, their branches forming a perpetually shadowed canopy. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cold, metallic, like old iron. Their phone signals evaporated miles back, leaving them utterly isolated. A shiver traced Sarah's spine, but Mark, ever the optimist, just laughed it off. Perfect, no distractions, he'd said, his voice a little too loud in the sudden, engulfing quiet. The cabin itself stood nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of pines. It was a charming little place, really. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a stone fireplace, all bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. But even then, there was something off. The light didn't quite penetrate the deeper parts of the clearing. The air was too still. Not a single bird sang. It was as if the forest around them was holding its breath. Their first night was mostly uneventful, filled with the cozy crackle of a fire and the easy intimacy of a couple unwinding. But as the fire died down and darkness truly claimed the woods, they started to hear it. Faint scratching sounds deep within the walls, not the frantic scurry of mice, but a slow, deliberate scrape, like something dragging itself across old timber. Mark, ever the pragmatist, blamed squirrels. Old cabins, Sarah. Full of critters. Sarah didn't argue, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the ancient house, every rustle outside, felt amplified, sinister. The next morning, they decided to explore. They followed a barely visible game trail deeper into the woods, the silence pressing in on them. After about an hour, they stumbled upon it, a small circular clearing, unnaturally devoid of plant life, in the center. In the middle stood a cluster of rough-hewn stones, arranged in a crude circle, almost like a primitive altar. And carved into the bark of one of the towering pines surrounding it was a symbol, not a cross, not a star. Something ancient, geometric, and deeply unsettling. A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. "Whoa, check this out," Mark said, his voice a low whistle. "Old cult stuff, maybe. Or just some weird local art." He reached out to touch one of the stones, but Sarah yanked his arm back. "Don't, Mark, let's just leave it alone." An undeniable sense of dread had settled over her, a feeling of being watched by something unseen, something very old and very patient. They turned back, the oppressive silence of the woods now feeling less peaceful and more predatory. When they returned to the cabin, another chill went down Sarah's spine. The front door, which Mark had explicitly remembered locking before their hike, stood ajar. Just a crack, no sign of forced entry, no shattered glass, no splintered wood. Mark checked every window, every lock, nothing. He tried to rationalize it, must have forgotten, babe. Or the old wood warped, but his eyes betrayed his unease. He looked over his shoulder more than once that afternoon. That night, the scratching in the walls intensified. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It was dragging, thumping, and then distinctly tapping. A methodical, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the bedroom window, like brittle fingernails. Sarah burrowed deeper under the covers, clutching Mark's arm. He was awake too, rigid beside her. The sounds outside their flimsy wooden walls were no longer easily dismissed. They heard what sounded like heavy footsteps circling the cabin, accompanied by faint, indistinguishable whispers carried on the wind. The colder, even with the small fire in the living room seeping into their bedroom like a damp shroud. "It's just the wind, Sarah," Mark whispered, but his voice was strained, laced with a fear he was trying desperately to hide. The old house settling, but the wind outside was silent, the trees were still, and the whispers, now closer, seemed to be calling their names, distorted and guttural. The metallic tang of fear was thick in Sarah's throat, a taste she would never forget. As the pre-dawn light began to filter through the trees, painting the cabin in an eerie gray, Mark spotted something. A loose floorboard near the fireplace, slightly ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps a desperate need for answers, drove him. He pried it open. Inside, nestled in the damp earth, was a small leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, brittle, filled with frantic, looping script. Sarah watched over his shoulder as he read the first few entries aloud, his voice trembling. They spoke of the cabin's original owner, of strange occurrences, of the whispers in the trees, and the hunger of the woods. The entries grew increasingly desperate, detailing disappearances, strange shadows, and the chilling realization that hits in the WALLS, it's waiting. The last entry was just a single, frantic scrawl, almost illegible. "It's here, it WANTS out, it WANTS US." The journal fell from Mark's shaking hands. All rational explanations evaporated. The blood drained from Sarah's face. The cabin, their idyllic escape, was a trap, a tomb. They had to leave. Now they scrambled, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Mark grabbed the car keys, but when he went outside, a gasp of pure horror escaped him. Both front tires were slashed, deliberately, deeply. And the keys, which he swore he'd just had in his hand, were gone, vanished. No phone signal, no neighbors for miles, and now no escape. They were utterly, terrifyingly alone. Panic set in. The cabin, which had felt merely unsettling hours ago, now pulsed with a malevolent energy. The walls creaked and groaned, not like old wood settling, but like a living thing stretching its ancient limbs. Grotesque shadows danced in the corners, elongating, twisting into forms that defied geometry. A guttural growl, deep and resonant, rumbled from beneath the floorboards, shaking the very foundations of the house. The whispers, those faint, distorted sounds from the night before, now became clear, impossibly close. They slithered from every crack, every shadow, calling their names. "Sarah, Mark, come play." The voices were not human, not animal. They were a cacophony of ancient suffering, laced with a predatory glee. Suddenly, a sickening splintering sound tore through the air. A section of the wall near the fireplace, where Mark had found the journal, bulged inwards, as if something immense was pressing against it from the other side. Wood groaned, paint cracked. Mark, with a desperate roar, shoved a heavy armchair against it, but it was like pushing against an ocean wave. Sarah pressed herself against the opposite wall, her eyes wide with terror. Through the grimy window, she saw them, countless glowing eyes, reflecting the dim cabin light, peering in from the oppressive darkness of the woods. They blinked slowly, deliberately, utterly devoid of mercy. The entity made its move. Not through the wall, not through the window. It moved within the cabin. The temperature plummeted, and a cold, fetid breath washed over them, smelling of damp earth and something acrid, like old blood and decay. The air thickened, pressing down, making it hard to breathe, hard to scream. "Sarah, look out." Mark's voice was a desperate yell. She spun around, just in time to see a dark, amorphous shape surge from the shadows of the hallway. It wasn't solid, not entirely, but it radiated an unimaginable cold, a primal wrongness. It moved with impossible speed, consuming the space between them. Mark, bless his brave, foolish heart, threw himself between Sarah and the thing. He let out a choked cry, a horrifying wet sound that ripped through Sarah's ears, as if something was being torn from him. Then he was gone, not vanished, not dragged away, just absorbed, like smoke into smoke. The shape swelled for a moment, then contracted, leaving only the metallic scent of terror and a lingering chill. Sarah's mind shattered. She couldn't process what she'd just witnessed. Her scream was trapped in her throat, a raw primal sound that wouldn't escape. Blind panic took over. The cabin was alive. It was hungry, and it had just eaten Mark. She dove under the old wooden dining table, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath ragged. The whispers were all around her now, a chorus of voices pressing against her skull, promising torment. She heard something slithering across the floorboards, heavy, wet. Then, a cold, skeletal hand, impossibly long and gnarled, reached out from a crack in the wall, directly beside her head. Its fingertips brushed her hair. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, Sarah scrambled out from under the table, heedless of the splinters that tore at her skin. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but the window near the kitchen, which had been stubbornly sealed shut, now stood slightly ajar. She clawed at it, shoved it open, and threw herself out into the night, landing hard on the damp earth. She didn't look back. She ran, through the terrifying woods, bare branches whipping at her face, roots tripping her, the whispers chasing her, echoing in her mind. Every shadow was a reaching hand, every rustle of leaves a hungry breath. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed onto a barely used logging road, miles from the cabin. Hours later, a passing hunter found her, huddled in a ditch, covered in mud, blood, and tears. She was barely coherent, babbling about whispers, a cabin that ate her boyfriend, and eyes in the dark. She spent weeks in a psychiatric ward, her story dismissed as trauma-induced psychosis. The authorities investigated. They found the cabin, exactly as she described, empty. There was no sign of Mark, no sign of a struggle, no blood, no evidence whatsoever. The journal she'd spoken of was gone. The slashed tires, just a flat tire, easily repaired. They declared Mark a missing person, likely having wandered off into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Another statistic. Sarah was released, her sanity questioned, her life irrevocably shattered. She moved across the country, tried to start over. But the silence of the Blackwood Pines had followed her. She still hears the whispers, sometimes, in the dead of night, calling her name from the shadows of her new apartment. She sees eyes in the dark corners of her room, fleeting glimpses that vanish when she turns. And every time the wind howls, she smells it, that cold, metallic scent of old blood and decay. The cabin still stands, they say, deep in the Blackwood Pines, waiting, silent. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the forest breathes its ancient breath, you can hear a faint, methodical tapping against its windows, like brittle fingernails, eager for the next lost soul. Because some silences, folks, never truly end. They just lie in wait.